This is why it's important to test mic placement before you start. Hello. Welcome back to Video Breakdown, the show where I reverse engineer a content creator style and see how hard or how easy the process is. Today we're delving into a topic that's near and dear to my heart, that being coffee, and taking a look at one of my favorite new YouTubers within the past year or so, Morgan Drinks Coffee. Morgan Drinks Coffee is hosted by Morgan Eckroth and is currently at over 600,000 subscribers on YouTube and over 130 videos. However, Morgan Drinks Coffee is an even bigger star off of YouTube with over 5.5 million followers on TikTok. Her content on TikTok is a lot more like short format skits, whereas on YouTube it's more reviews and informative videos about the process of making coffee. And that's the kind of content that I'm going to be trying to emulate today. Now I'm still going to do my research phase, but I will say I already decided what topic I'm going to do the video on, and that's this, the Gear BRU iced coffee cold brew system. I actually spotted this thing while I was doing my shopping for the cocktail chemistry episode, and already being a fan of cold brew, I had to buy it. I'm gonna test this thing out, give it a little review, compare it to our current method of making cold brew, and I'm gonna cross my fingers and hope that this becomes one of my new favorite coffee brewers. So, we've got a plan for the content, let's go figure out the style. Right off the bat, we're seeing some consistency here, which is a great thing. These two videos are slightly older. These two videos are within the past, I'd say, month or so, and you can see a definite increase in production quality. Much like with cocktail chemistry, Morgan recently upgraded from shooting her episodes on a camera phone to shooting with a more dedicated camera, which thank God, because I am not in the mood to film with a phone again. And again, we've got consistency. It's the same kitchen background, the same general camera setup, same even lighting across the face, and same black turtleneck in every single one. That's going to be exciting for my wife, I think, because she's wanted me to get a black turtleneck for a while now. We've got some punch-ins, some close-ups, occasionally an alternate angle or two, some nice soft music in the background. If you want to hear what it actually sounds like, please go check out Morgan's channel. And even including the close-ups, this looks very doable. Let's break this down. Okay, so this seems like a pretty streamlined approach, although if past experiences have taught me anything, it's that I can be wrong sometimes. The two main challenges for me will be, one, figuring out where in my apartment I'm gonna film. It's not exactly tailor-made to emulate Morgan Drinks Coffee's style. Her shot is pretty wide and I'm limited on counter space in here. And then the second thing is gonna be staggering my production to accommodate, well, this. As you can see here, this thing requires different amounts of time to brew different strengths of coffee, all of which I plan to try. So I'm gonna need to set up my main Morgan Drinks Coffee shot, unbox this on camera, then brew each one of these off camera, which is gonna take at least 16 hours, then come back on camera and try each one of them. And I'm not really looking forward to leaving the camera and lighting set up during those whole 16 hours, so that's gonna be a bit of a challenge. But other than that, I'm really excited to try a new method of cold brew, and honestly, any excuse to drink coffee is fine with me. Since there's no need for a shopping trip this time, let's get right to filming. It's possible I said a minute ago that I didn't need to go on a shopping trip, and if I did, it's even more possible that I lied. Exhibit A, the black turtleneck. The best black turtleneck I ended up finding was actually a women's, but that's fine because I'm actually wearing my wife's pants right now. And it's actually super comfortable. I'm really excited to actually wear this outside of the video. Exhibit B, the coffee. As part of this video, I'm gonna compare our normal method of making cold brew with this brew method. And for our regular cold brew, we usually use beans that are slightly on the cheaper end, like these ones, but because this is gonna have such an emphasis on taste, I went with something a little nicer. These are the type of beans I normally use when I make my hot coffee with AeroPress. The reason we use slightly cheaper beans for cold brew is because it dulls the taste a little more. So both our recipe for cold brew and the brew recipe for cold brew, I'm gonna be using North Star Espresso. As far as my camera and lighting setup goes, it took about 45 minutes and I struggled a little bit trying to find where in the apartment would be best to do it. Obviously the kitchen is the most appropriate because it resembles Morgan's background, but there's actually a sink right here that you can't really see, so I'm having to lean forward a little bit to get to this banister to actually touch the things that I'm gonna be making coffee with. But I think as long as I stand up straight and just extend my arms and not lean my body, it's not gonna look that weird. The added bonus is that the kitchen doesn't have carpet, so it's gonna be the only place where I can do Morgan's trademark slide into the frame to start the video. I got my main camera with a 35mm lens on and my secondary camera for close-ups right here. Hopefully it stays focused where I want it to. And like I said, the main challenge that I'm not really looking forward to is having to tear all this down and set it back up again after my almost 16 hours of cold brew making, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Hopefully we can get it looking approximately the same as it looks right now. Okay, I think we should just jump right into it. I've learned my lesson from the cocktail chemistry video, and I have most of the stuff that I need just off camera right here, and the other stuff is most likely in this cupboard. This thing has actually been sitting on my nightstand waiting for me to unbox it for several weeks, so I'm actually excited to get it open. This part seems like it wants to come off, but also it doesn't. Back is starting to hurt, actually, from leaning forward. Okay, I'm gonna get familiar with these instructions and give all this stuff a wash, and we'll be back in a minute. Better not get my turtleneck wet washing this stuff. You don't see this part in a Morgan Drinks Coffee episode. Okay, we're gonna take a pause. I'm gonna rest my back, and I'm gonna look over these instructions. Pop the brewer, and that's just under 400 grams. So, what's 400 divided by 14?
The answer is approximately 28.571429.
Wish me luck on grind size 13. Oh, I gotta purge it first. And give it a little stir. It looks like wet poop. And we're gonna set to just off of medium and let it go. That doesn't look right. And like I said, we're gonna do 100 grams of coffee. Again? That's not gonna fit in the French press, is it? We'll see. Oh yeah, it'll fit. Hey Google, what's 700 minus 582? Close enough. Now it's not close enough. Ah, now it's even further. Ah, close enough. That was a lot of static. A lot of chaff. Oh man. I hope it's not on the carpet. And it's on wood, no less. Okay, I'm moving this to the counter. I see the coffee droplets dropping into the main chamber, and I see the particles spread out when it drops, and then I see the water run down the side and spill on my counter. I honestly had high hopes for this thing. Maybe it's user error. Maybe I really didn't tighten the things all the way, but I'm gonna give it a fair chance. My cold brew in the French press is gonna take at least 12 hours. Oh yeah, hey Google, set a timer for 11 hours and 55 minutes. Hello? Set a timer for 11 hours and 54 minutes.
Sure, 11 hours, 54 minutes.
Guess I'm waking up at 7 a.m. to filter this. The brew, I'll let it finish doing its thing. I will make another batch on camera, but not as part of the Morgan Drinks Coffee episode. I'll just do it over here. Speaking of which, I'll give you a close-up view of how much it's actually spilling by the second. And that's that for now. Now, considering I'm not gonna make the 16 hours of cold brew I thought I was gonna make with a 10-hour batch, a 4-hour batch, and an hour-and-a-half batch, I think I might actually leave the lights and camera set up just for the next 12 hours or so. Then I'll come back, I'll taste them, I'll give them a little review, and we'll wrap up. Okay, see you in an amount of time. Okay, so I don't know if I can say with utmost confidence that it's done, but it's dripping so slowly, and it's been at basically the same level for so long. And enough went wrong that I'm willing to call it done. You can see the main drip of coffee right from the center. It only does one droplet at a time, essentially, but you can see the coffee in the droplet. But then around the cone, you can see like 10 other droplets that are just water, which means the water passed right through the top without touching the coffee at all and dripped right into the reservoir. So this is gonna be a pretty watery coffee. It's probably gonna be super weak and not taste good at all. Unfortunately, because so much went wrong in this brew, I can't tell for certain if the grind size was correct or incorrect. So I'm gonna drain this, save it for tasting on camera, clean it, grind at 13 again, and redo it. Hopefully everything will be tight this time and it'll be okay, maybe. Seems like maybe some of the water is stuck in the top and it's not able to quite drain down because the hole is so small. And actually, the platform that the water sits on isn't sloped, it's just flat. So when it gets down to a small amount of water, it just kind of sits there. There's some coffee grinds in the bottom. I also had to put down a drop cloth because it was leaking all over the counter. There's maybe a teaspoon of water left in the very top of this thing that I poured into here. And then you can see there's even more water trapped underneath this main platform that didn't come through the very bottom yet. I've got the instructions here. This time I'm gonna follow it to a T and make sure it's all tight. Doesn't go that tight, it just kind of makes it click and then stops. Okay, now here's where I think the recipe might have gone wrong last time. It says to put the cone in the fully open position before pouring the water in. Then, once the water's in, then you twist it to the drip rate that you want. This seems like it would make too much water flow through too fast and it would start to leak everywhere. So this time I'm gonna set it to the drip rate that I want it to be at before I put the water in. So I'm actually disobeying the instructions. Fill with 14 ounces of cold water. Now it says to wait 30 to 60 seconds before putting it on the tumbler. Now I didn't explicitly do this last time, but I may have done it by accident just while I was doing other stuff. So I don't think that was the problem. Set a timer for 30 seconds. Stop. Okay, now there's water spilling all over my scale. I guess that's why they tell you to wait 30 to 60 seconds, just for it to all spill everywhere. Okay, coffee's definitely coming out, but it's most definitely leaking water everywhere. Where is the flaw in this design here? Okay, I see it. So it's right there. It's where the brew cone meets the dial. That's where it's leaking. I mean, I tightened all the parts and this just seems like a massive failure to me. It's actively leaked water all over my counter. I'm not sure if you can see that. The water's pooling just along that rim there. You can see the shine of it right there. It's just, I mean, jeepers creepers. I would do it a third time, but I don't know what I would change. It's actually pretty close to the slowest drip speed on the drip meter, and that's supposed to take 10 hours. I don't see how this would take 10 hours to filter. It's already about halfway to what it was last time. I mean, it's not exactly leaking as much as last time, but the fact that I can still see water passing straight through with no coffee in it seems like a major problem. I'm gonna let this monstrosity happen, and then tomorrow morning, maybe I'll give it a third try. But again, I don't know what I'm gonna change. Ugh, okay. Wish this thing luck. And we're back, some 16 or so hours later. This is now my third attempt at the brew. I've got the two others over there, plus my cold brew recipe. It's been a long time coming to taste test this stuff, so let's just jump right back into the episode. And here I thought I'd be able to do this without spilling. I wonder how often these content creators spill on camera but completely leave it out. Now that I've decanted these into their own little glasses, I'd say the difference in color between the 4 of them is even more apparent. My first brew with the brew, 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 my first brew with the brew. Saying brew with the brew is really weird. How does she end her videos?
But for now, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for sticking around with me while I gave this my best go.
Very fluid. Okay, time to get all this cleaned up. Oh man, I got a lot of coffee to drink. Because you know what? I have this weak batch of brew, these 2 slightly less weak batches of brew, all this cold brew concentrate, and then I actually had all this cold brew concentrate that we already had, but I needed to make it on camera, so coffee for the next month. Okay, I'm gonna get to some editing, drink a bunch of coffee, and we'll see you in a little bit. Hello there. Doing these episodes requires a decision between trying to vaguely sound like the person or doing a full-on impression. Hopefully the balance that I struck here was respectable to Morgan, because it's not quite a full-on impression, but it's definitely not just plain me either. So was the coffee from the brew any good? Let's take a look at the episode and find out. Hello there. Today I've got something a little special to show you, and it's maybe one of the cheapest coffee brewers I have ever bought. And that is this. The Gear BRU iced coffee cold brew system. Next to this super cheap Melita pour over cone, I think this is maybe the cheapest coffee brewer I've ever bought at a grand total of $4. Like the packaging says, this makes cold brew, and it looks to me like one of those slow drip systems where you let the water slowly drip down over the coffee bed, and over the course of several hours, it saturates it and brews into iced coffee. Or technically cold brew, and then you could make it iced coffee if you wanted to. Simply fill, twist, and drip. I know that Gear is not specifically a coffee company. They make Tupperware kind of containers and things to keep your lunch cold. But we're gonna try it out today and we're gonna see if it makes some good tasting coffee. Now, my go-to method for making cold brew is just the infusion technique to put all the coffee grounds and all the water in the same container, let it steep, and then pour it through said pour over filter. And today we're gonna try both methods with the same coffee and see which one comes out on top. I actually really love the packaging on this thing, and it's part of what caught my eye in the store in the first place. They've got this nice reflective bronze looking pattern on the outside, and there's just overall a lot of pleasing imagery here. I really dig it. There's actually a lot of info on the packaging too. It says, introducing Gear BRU, a single serve brewing system for smooth and rich iced coffee produced by a cold brew drip method. Cold brew, a process in which coffee is brewed with cold water at a slower pace, creating a less acidic taste. They're all in on this. There's also some basic instructions here. Fill with your favorite ground coffee and add ice water to top clear vessel. Twist, adjust drip rate by twisting brew dial, a slower pace for a smoother taste. And drip, always a continuous flow of water with dual chamber capillary action. Now, arguably the most interesting aspect of this box is this side. What kind of brew are you? According to the scale here, light is 1.5 hours of brew time, medium is 4 hours, and bold is 10 hours. I'm interested in unpacking this aspect of the instructions because to me, if you're adjusting how long you're brewing, you should also be adjusting the temperature that you're brewing or the coarseness of the grind or something. So hopefully they mention that in further instructions on the inside. Speaking of which, let's get this bad boy open. Okay, we've got our main chamber here and adjustable dial. Oh, that's interesting. Diffuser papers. They look almost identical to AeroPress filters. By comparison, here's the brew papers next to an AeroPress filter. You can see the AeroPress filter is just a bit smaller, but that's really interesting. I didn't expect that to come with this. I wonder how the thickness compares. So we've got our main chamber here. This looks like a lid for the cup after you've brewed. And there looks to be some kind of crazy locking mechanism that I don't understand, but hopefully I will soon. Okay, this part twists. Oh, look at that. And next we have, oh, I see instructions. Boom. And the main cup / brewing vessel. This actually seems good quality. I think it's double walled, sturdy. I would drink out of this. And strangely, it has this extra collar thing, which isn't the top, but this is the top, so there's two tops. Oh, I get it. This probably fits in here, and then, yeah. Anything else? Ooh, yes. The straw that goes with the lid, and this, I have no idea what this is. Let's get a little tidied up here. So let's take a look at the instructions, which look fairly robust. Be your own brewista. Don't know if that name's gonna catch on. Get to know brew. Assemble as shown for brewing. Oh, so this is a stand for this. Okay, handy. So they refer to this as the Triton tumbler with stability ring. This is the grounds cone. This is the brew dial. This on the inside is the lock chamber. We got the water reservoir and the lid. Okay, I'm gonna get familiar with these instructions and give all this stuff a wash, and we'll be back in a minute. So from a setup and operation standpoint, this instruction set, very helpful. Basically, you control your drip rate with this dial, put your coffee grounds in here, wet them, put the diffuser paper on top, lock this onto here, pop it onto the holder, pour in 14 ounces of water while the marker is on the O position, pop the brewer on top of the tumbler and dial to your preferred drip rate. Now from a brewing standpoint, this instruction set, not helpful. It basically says you can use a fast, medium, or slow drip, you can use a coarse, medium, or fine ground, and you can brew cold, colder, and coldest for the temperature. However, it's not clear how these factors mix and match. Should I use a slow drip, coarse grind, and coldest temperature, fast drip, fine grind, and slightly warmer temperature? Not really sure. But they do have a little orange water droplet marker to indicate what they feel is the best way to brew. So for better or for worse, we're gonna go with that. And the caveat it gives at the bottom is,
ultimately, it comes down to taste. Taste is very subjective. Assuming all essential brewing variables are in line, simply ask, does the brew still taste too strong? Adjust the grind coarser and speed up drip rate. Does the brew taste weak, watery, or sour? Adjust the grind finer and slow the drip rate.
For their recommendations, they recommend a drip that is on the slower end of medium, a grind size that is medium, like fine sand, wish me luck on that one. And for temperature, they recommend cold, which thankfully they write is cold water, no ice, brewed outside the fridge. If you've been following along, then you may have noticed that nowhere in these instructions do they indicate dose. My typical cold brew recipe is a 1:7 ratio of coffee to water, so I'm gonna be doing 100 grams of coffee to 700 grams of water. But that is to make a cold brew concentrate, so I dilute it with a 1:1 ratio of coffee to water before I drink it. With this, I'm not sure what it wants me to do. I could try 1:7, I could try 1:14. The only thing that leads me to believe that they don't intend you to make a concentrate is that you're brewing directly into the cup that you're gonna drink it out of, which kind of implies that it's gonna be ready to go once it's done brewing without needing to add much to it. With that said, I'm gonna use a 1:14 ratio, so if we're using 14 ounces of water, we're gonna use 1 ounce of coffee. But I prefer measuring in grams, so we're gonna do a little bit of an adjustment there. They mention a medium grind size, like fine sand. I'm kinda gonna be throwing a dart at a dartboard here and hoping I hit a bullseye, but it's unlikely. So to start, I'm gonna try out grind size 13 on the Baratza Encore and see where we land. Okay, that's about 14 ounces, which is what they recommend. And that's just under 400 grams. So we're gonna do 28.5 grams of coffee. Now, obviously some of the water is gonna be absorbed and held in the grounds, but it looks like 14 ounces makes this pretty full, and I'm sure they intend you to add milk or ice or whatever you want in this thing. So probably a concentrate that you're supposed to dilute wasn't what they were going for here. Today, I'll be brewing both the brew recipe for cold brew and my recipe with Equator North Star Espresso. I've had this coffee before and I know I like it, so if the brew lets me down, it's because of the method, not the coffee. There we go, that's 28.5 grams. It fits in the cone pretty nicely. Wish me luck on grind size 13. The other thing about this recipe is that while the outside of the box makes mention of a 1.5 hour, 4 hour, and 10 hour brew, the instructions on the inside don't say anything about time, and they only mention the drip rate. So I guess I'm just supposed to set it and then wait until it's done. Okay, so next I'm supposed to saturate the grounds with water and give it a little stir. Now the weird part is that water isn't part of the 14 ounces. It just says to add water, and it doesn't say whether to let it drain out or what. So I don't know, I just added water. Wet the filter and place it on top. Now we're gonna twist this on here, set it to the open position. It says that specifically. Then while it's in the open position, we're pouring over our 14 ounces of water. True to their word, it just fills it up. And we're gonna set to just off of medium and let it go. Okay, so this has been on here for a few minutes and something doesn't quite look right. I'm noticing that the coffee is dripping very slowly out of the bottom, but the water from the top seems to be dripping from the edges here, meaning that it's not passing through the coffee and actually making coffee. It's possible one of the fittings isn't quite tight enough, but I swear I followed the instructions exactly. I also noticed that when I lifted up the brew chamber to adjust it, a lot more water flowed in, which also makes me think that something's going wrong here. I'm noticing some tiny coffee particles in the liquid below. Maybe my grind size was too fine. But for that, we're just gonna have to set it and forget it and come back whenever it's done. And for what it's worth, there did end up being a tiny bit of coffee in the very bottom of the cone holder, but it's maybe half a teaspoon. So now onto my recipe for cold brew. Since I'm making such a small batch, I'm just gonna do it in the French press to make pouring and straining a bit easier. And like I said, we're gonna do 100 grams of beans. And I'm gonna grind these on grind setting 31 on the Baratza Encore. And 100 into the 700. I'm gonna give them a big old stir to make sure they're all evenly saturated. And this is gonna sit on the counter for 12 hours, while this sits on the counter for an amount of time. Actually, it seems like at least half of the water has gone down already, but a lot of it's leaking out. Yeah, it's leaking all over the counter. Oh, it's getting everywhere. Okay, something tells me this one is a wash. I'm gonna let this finish brewing off camera. I'll wait to taste it until I'm on camera again, but in the meantime, I'll give it another shot, make sure all the fittings are tight, and try and make this recipe work. I'm gonna get all this cleaned up, and I'll see you then. We're back and we have coffee. Now I've got 4 batches of cold brew that we're gonna try here, one of which is my recipe and 3 are from the brew. So this is my first attempt. This one, for the most part, I followed the instructions as closely as I could. It was grind size 13 and it leaked all over the table. This second batch here was essentially the exact same. I didn't change anything. I just made sure that all the fittings were tight and I maybe agitated it a little bit less. You can see based on the differing amounts that this one clearly leaked out of the container a lot less and retained much more of the liquid. And I think a lot of that had to do with me just moving the brewer around a lot less. Now my third batch here, which just finished up recently, I tried a few different things. First off, just for the sake of it, I decided to try a coarser grind size, so I went from 13 to 20, which is right in the middle of my Baratza Encore settings between 1 and 40. The instructions recommended a medium grind size, so right in the middle is about as medium as you can get. The other thing that I tried was I looked up some videos online and looked in the comments, and a lot of people were complaining about the leaking. And one commenter in particular recommended taking off the collar that goes around the tumbler, which prevents the water from coming out to the outside of the container and leaking on the counter. So I tried that. And without a doubt, this is the most filled that any of these brews have been. All the water from the top chamber made it into the bottom and none of it leaked. But you can tell that one of these things is not like the others. Because all the water that didn't touch the coffee made it into the tumbler instead of outside the tumbler, you can see just based on the color that this brew is going to be a lot weaker. The main thing that causes the leaking is the fact that these two pieces right here don't fit together tight. They're a little loose, and so the water just comes right out, and when the collar is on, it just flows right outside of the container and onto the counter. So these two brews I'm expecting to taste pretty much the same with slight differences. This one I'm expecting to taste very weak and completely different since I used a different grind size. And then we also have the batch of cold brew concentrate that I made from the recipe that I already use. My first attempt at the brew and my regular cold brew recipe seem about the same color and the darkest of all the 4. My second attempt at the brew is surprisingly a little bit lighter. I didn't expect that since I mostly did the same thing between these two brews. And the most recent attempt at the brew with all the water leaked in is easily the lightest. I am going to dilute this one with equal parts water once I get to the tasting, but for the purposes of post-brew color, that's what it looks like. So here we go, first attempt at the brew. Not pleasant. It's pretty harsh on the tongue, bitter in not such a great way. A little watery, kind of fruity in a bit of a nice way. Overall, I guess I could drink it if I had to. Number 2. Okay, a lot more watery. It kind of tastes stale, actually a lot less flavor than that first one. It tastes a little like tea, and I'm not a big tea drinker, so that's not a plus for me. Number 3. Okay, that just tastes like water with a slight hint of coffee in it. Not a huge fan. Okay, and here's my cold brew recipe diluted with equal parts water. You can see the color change there. Okay, I'd say that's easily the smoothest with just a slight amount of bitterness. It actually does have a fair bit less flavor than this first attempt at the brew, but I think a big reason why people choose cold brew is for the less intense flavors and less acidic taste. So this smooth cup caters to that desire. Okay, going back to this one after tasting that one, this one is way too harsh and acidic. Since it was the first one I drank and I didn't have much to compare it to, it tasted pretty good, but after all these, not great. And that's a shame because out of the 3 brews from the brew, this one actually had the most going for it. It had the most flavor, it had the most complexity, but it also was the brew where it seemed like the most went wrong, and that means it didn't have a lot of repeatability. So even if I liked it and wanted to do it again, when I tried to do it again, I got something that tasted completely different. I have no idea how I would achieve the 10-hour or even the 4-hour drip rate that the box lists. None of these brews took more than an hour to drip through. I'd say they took 45 minutes or less. And I was on the slower end of the drip, so I have no idea how I would stretch this out to 10 hours. I really would hesitate to recommend any of these over just the regular infusion method of making cold brew. And you could blame that on grind size or water temperature, but I think when it comes down to it, the thing just leaks. And it either leaks outside the container and gets water all over your counter and not enough water passes through the coffee, or it leaks inside the container and again, not enough water passes through the coffee and you get a super weak brew. Okay, so since this makes such poor coffee, would I personally recommend that you buy the brew? Yes, but why? Well, to be honest, I paid $4 for this thing from the dollar store, and while I struggled to make good coffee with it, I actually really like this tumbler. It's double-walled insulated, so it's probably gonna keep the coffee cold for a decent while, and overall I just think that the design is nice, and for $4, I think that's worth it for the tumbler alone. As an added bonus, I actually found that the cone holder was useful not only for holding the cone from the brew, but for holding my pour-over cone after I was done filtering my cold brew. It's got a little reservoir underneath to catch the last few drips that come out the bottom, and it was just convenient. So would I recommend this for brewing cold brew? No, absolutely not. If you want to brew cold brew and you have a decent grinder, just use the infusion method, grind the coffee, throw it together with the water, let it steep on the counter for 12 hours, and you'll have something that tastes good. But I would recommend the brew if you want a nice high quality tumbler and you want a solution to this very niche problem of drips from your pour-over cone. If you happen to have the brew and you've managed to find a solution to the leaking problem, I would love to hear it because I'd love to get some more use out of this thing and get some decent coffee coming out of it. So if you see the brew out in the wild for a good price, consider picking it up. I hope this was fun for you. Have a great rest of your day and see you next time. Well, that was fun, and no, it wasn't good. Kind of a bummer. I had high hopes for it. It was only $4, but if you're gonna spend $4 on a coffee brewer, make it a pour-over cone. Other than that, what did we learn? Well, we learned that turtlenecks are very, very comfortable. We learned that Cool Gear doesn't have much quality control, and that's probably why the brew was at the dollar store in the first place. We learned that the simpler way to make cold brew has less steps, less physical components, it's more repeatable, and it just tastes better. Although funnily enough, I bought slightly more expensive beans than I would normally use for cold brew for this video specifically, and I found that they didn't taste better. I know I probably should have dialed in the grind size a bit more, but when it came down to it, I liked the Melita cold brew better than the Equator cold brew. Just goes to show you don't have to spend a ton on beans if your method and preparation are solid. Now the difficulty. Well, compared to the previous episode I made that was drink focused, that being cocktail chemistry, it took significantly longer to make than that episode, but it was easier. I'll boil that down to 2 reasons. For one, Morgan Drinks Coffee was mostly set it and forget it. I set up the 2 cameras, I set up the lighting, hit record, and then I just kind of talked for a while, which was fun. I felt like I could be more off the cuff and more personal. Cocktail chemistry, on the other hand, I had to change the perspective a few times, reset up for the drinking shot, and the voiceover at the end made it feel a lot less organic and just more specific. So naturally, the second reason why it was easier was that I could just write the script on the fly. Cocktail chemistry, I actually had to sit down and write how to make the cocktail, which wasn't too hard. I mean, I don't even think I mentioned that in the episode, but it was an extra step. The lighting for Morgan Drinks Coffee didn't take that long to get right either, so I'm gonna give this a difficulty rating of 2 out of 10. Just a smidge below cocktail chemistry. But it was more fun. Adding on to that, making mistakes in the Morgan Drinks Coffee episode kind of felt like part of the process, as long as it wasn't my fault and it was the fault of the brew. Whereas making mistakes in the cocktail chemistry episode, I actively had to go back and redo things because it was supposed to be instructional. For the cost, I spent $7 on the turtleneck, $4 on the brew, and $15 or so on the coffee. Now, considering buying the turtleneck was a one-time purchase and the coffee I would have been buying anyway, it was a pretty cheap episode. I know Morgan makes a lot of episodes where she either tries out a really expensive espresso machine or buys all the coffee products of a certain store, so those would obviously be more expensive, but for this, pretty cheap. And the time commitment it took, including setup, shooting, and editing, was less than 6 hours. Yes, those 6 hours were spaced apart because I had to wait overnight, but That was just because of the particular topic I picked for the episode. So overall, I had a ton of fun this episode. I'm a pretty big coffee drinker, so being able to taste each individual method of making was pretty fun. I shared the results and had my wife taste them afterwards. And I just found the style of Morgan Drinks Coffee's YouTube videos to be nice and loose and fun to step inside for a bit. Morgan, if you see this, I really hope you were entertained. I've been plenty entertained by your videos lately. And all the rest of you, please go subscribe to Morgan Drinks Coffee. Maybe subscribe to me too. Thank you very much for watching, and go make somebody smile today.